Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have bad martinis for conservatives today. All of it brought to you by ExpressVPN. Protect your online activity today and find out how you can get 3 months of that protection free at expressvpn.com/martini. Jim, let's start with the first bad martini, and it's double-barreled. The first one we're going to just touch on very quickly, though, and that's the 8-count conviction for Paul Manafort, tax fraud, bank fraud, hiding overseas bank accounts, none of it tied to Russian collusion or even the Trump campaign. And so while it's certainly a salacious story, and Trump is out there tweeting really nice things about Manafort, which makes you wonder whether Manafort could say something to prosecutors, that's more smoke than fire, unless you're Manafort himself, who's probably going to spend the rest of his life in prison. But as you write in The Jolt today, the bigger story came with the plea bargain from former Trump attorney Michael Cohen. Quote, "But Michael Cohen just dramatically transformed Trump's presidency by pleading guilty to 5 counts of tax evasion and a single count of bank fraud, and declaring in a federal courtroom that he lied on a home equity line of credit to obtain money to pay off Stormy Daniels, quote, in coordination with and at the direction of a candidate for federal office, unquote, and that he did so, quote, for the principal purpose of influencing the election." In other words, Cohen has now effectively testified that Trump conspired with him to commit a crime. For his own guilty pleas, Cohen is facing anywhere from 46 to 63 months in prison, almost 4 or more than 5 years, depending on what the judge decides. Cohen's attorney, Lanny Davis, put it explicitly after the decision. Cohen stood up and testified under oath that Donald Trump directed him to commit a crime by making payments to 2 women for the principal purpose of influencing election. Karen McDougal's the other one. If those payments were a crime for Michael Cohen, then why wouldn't they be a crime for Donald Trump? So, Jim, we're learning a lot about election law here in the last 24 hours. Apparently, if Trump had just cut these women a check, he'd be fine. But since he had somebody else do it and reimbursed him, that's not okay. And then, of course, there's the lying on the home equity line on bank forms and so forth. That's not good. So there's who knows where this is going from here. But there's more fire than there was a couple days ago with all this smoke.
Yeah. I mean, any day the guy who was your lawyer stands in a federal courtroom in Manhattan and says, "I violated the law at the direction of the president," it's a bad day for the president. Whether this leads to full-fledged impeachment hearings or really a bad news cycle, it means something that Cohen is making this accusation. And of course, this is the guy who once boasted, "I would take a bullet for the president," and talked about what a loyal guy he was, and he was inseparable, and he's the only guy who's out looking for the interests of the president and his family. Take everything Michael Cohen says with a grain of salt, which is the problem for Mueller and federal prosecutors here. That, the argument that Michael Cohen is less than credible is a fairly serious argument, considering that, Cohen is, admitting fraud on one hand and now believe what I'm saying about these other people who were involved on the other. Having said that, we all know that Cohen famously recorded a whole bunch of his phone calls with Trump. And so now the really interesting question is, does Mueller and federal prosecutors have tapes of Cohen and Trump discussing this sort of thing? And if Cohen says, I'm going to have to lie on the forms to the bank when I get the loan for this money, and Trump says, sure, lie if you have to, then it becomes a bigger deal. If there isn't that kind of discussion, I'm not so sure if this basically comes down to Cohen's word against Trump's. And let's face it, Greg, it's really plausible if Trump were to argue, I wasn't really paying attention to what Cohen was saying. I don't really listen to him. Or I don't really listen, period. We are now in the realm of a potential conspiracy charge. Now, of course, you can't necessarily press charges against a sitting president of the United States. Established Justice Department policy says, this is what impeachment is for. We haven't done it in our history. When it comes to criminal charges against a president, it turns into a political matter. Kick it over to Congress. And I think that one way or another, this is what's going to happen when Mueller makes his report. And it's worth making the argument, this isn't Russian collusion, as folks have been discussing for the past year, basically 2 years. This isn't ties to the Russian mob or any of the more salacious things. This is a tawdry effort to hide payments to a mistress and kind of, avoid embarrassment during the campaign. that basically amounted to an in-kind donation to the Trump campaign because it was done in that context. A lot of people argue about whether this will hold up in court, and I really enjoyed going back and remembering the infamous salacious story of Democratic candidate John Edwards, who had a somewhat similar circumstance, trying to cover up an illicit affair during the presidential campaign. Now, in that case, John Edwards went to one of his extraordinarily wealthy benefactors and donors and said, look, I need you to take care of this woman. We need to keep her, hidden during the campaign. And this donor shelled out, and none of it went through campaign accounts. And so that was the question for prosecutors, that, look, clearly this was a matter of a, really wealthy person basically handing a blank check to John Edwards to say, here, take care of your problem. I'll foot the bill for all this. Because I believe so much in your, you need to be president. And, was that a violation of campaign finance law? Well, it was a hung jury on a bunch of charges and an acquittal on another. So it was not the slam dunk case that prosecutors had hoped. You could probably make that argument that this sort of scenario shakes out for Trump and Cohen. None of this went through a Trump presidential campaign account. You could argue that this was a tawdry, salacious, and immoral act by these guys, but none of it actually violated the law. And my suspicion is at some point you will see this argument. There's also kind of a separate issue of, is this the sort of thing you remove a president over? And probably my guess is right now a whole bunch of Democrats are saying, heck, yes, it is. And you have a whole bunch of Republicans saying, heck, no, it's not. And I just I'm kind of curious about what everybody's views were back in 1998, because I was among those who thought that if a president lied under oath and encouraged other people to do the same, that was a serious matter, and you could not remain being president of the United States, chief law enforcement and head of the entire executive branch. But the country pretty much disagreed. And so now we're in a much grayer area of what an impeachable offense is, what counts as a high crime and misdemeanor. Does conspiring with Michael Cohen to lie on a bank form count as that? Certainly a lot of Republicans will say, heck no, and I'm not sure the American public is ready to say, okay, toss this guy over this salacious matter separate from his official duties. But we'll see how it shakes out. But I don't think there's any way you can say yesterday was a good day for the Trump campaign. Manafort, you're right, that Manafort's wrongdoings and convictions stem mostly from before he joined the campaign. I think the only matter about Manafort is you can say this was really bad judgment on Trump's part. But then again, people were saying that way back in 2016.
Yeah. First of all, big takeaway here. Don't cheat on your wife. Pence rule's looking pretty good right about now. And Jim, I guess I didn't think about it this deeply when it first happened, but when Michael Cohen, the guy, like you said, who would take the bullet for Donald Trump supposedly, hires Lanny Davis, the biggest Hillary cheerleader on the planet, you had to know he was going to roll, right?
Look, there were a couple interesting. I've been seeing a couple debates about this. There's an argument to be said that Lanny Davis is a very experienced Washington lawyer. He's very experienced with handling legal troubles that stem from political scandal. Like, if you have your hand in the cookie jar and you need to get out of trouble, who better to turn to, Greg, than a Clinton lawyer, right? You want somebody who's been there before and dealt with it. I find very little of what Lanny Davis says particularly plausible. So it'll be interesting to see how any of this does. But again, yes, look, the other lesson of this, as I said, from Lanny Davis bragging about how loyal he is, and then, of course, completely turning against the president. If you have to tell people you're funny, you're probably not that funny. If you have to tell people you're a nice guy, you probably aren't that nice a guy. And if you constantly need to tout your loyalty, you are probably not that loyal a person. Some of these traits are self-explanatory and exhibited through action, not the sort of things you need to reiterate out loud. And you're wondering if you're convincing the people around you or whether this is an effort to convince himself.
Yeah, good point. It's like we've said all along, when you watch and observe Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen, you never come away thinking, I don't think he'd ever do that.
They're a good bunch of guys. You can trust them.
Right. They just ooze competence and integrity. Oh, man. Well, Trump can't count on his personal lawyer to protect him, but you can count on ExpressVPN to protect you. With all the recent news about online security breaches, it's hard not to worry about where my data goes. Making an online purchase or simply tracking your email could put your private information at risk. You're being tracked. You are. It's just a fact. It's not a conspiracy theory. You're being tracked online by social media sites, marketing companies, and your mobile or internet provider. Not only can they record your browsing history, but they often sell it then to other corporations who want to profit from your information. So that's why you now have the opportunity to take back your privacy by using ExpressVPN.
ExpressVPN has easy-to-use apps that run seamlessly in the background of your computer, phone, or tablet. Turning on ExpressVPN protection only requires one click. ExpressVPN secures and anonymizes your internet browsing by encrypting your data and hiding your public IP address. Protecting yourself with ExpressVPN costs less than $7 a month. It is rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar and comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you ever use public Wi-Fi and want to keep hackers and spies from seeing your data, ExpressVPN is the solution. And if you don't want to hand over your online history to your internet provider or to data resellers, ExpressVPN is the answer for you.
Protect your online activity today. Do it now. Find out how you can get 3 months free at expressvpn.com/martini. That's EXPRESSVPN.com/martini for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Visit expressvpn.com/martini to learn more. Well, Jim, it was not a good day for the president yesterday, but at least it doesn't affect, Republican efforts to keep their majorities. Well, it actually might. And now they've got even worse news on that front. Los Angeles Times. Congressman Duncan Hunter of California and his wife, Margaret, were indicted by a federal grand jury Tuesday on charges they used $250,000 in campaign funds for personal use and filed false campaign finance reports with the Federal Election Commission to mask their actions. The 48-page indictment details lavish spending from 2009 to 2016, including family vacations to Italy and Hawaii, home utilities, school tuition for their children, video games, and even dental work. The San Diego Union Tribune first identified the improper spending, triggering a federal investigation by the Justice Department. To conceal the personal expenditures, family dental bills were listed as a charitable contribution to Smiles for Life, the government alleges. Tickets for the family to see Riverdance at the San Diego Civic Theater became San Diego Civic Center for Republican Women Federated Fundraising, according to the indictment. Clothing purchases at a golf course were falsely reported as golf balls for the wounded warriors. Oh, my word. SeaWorld tickets worth more than $250 were called an educational tour. Jim, this is smacking a lot like 2006 when Duke Cunningham and Bob Ney got indicted. Now we've got Chris Collins and Duncan Hunter here. It just gets sleazier and sleazier.
Yeah, the salary of a typical member of Congress is $174,000 a year. If you're in the leadership, you get a little bit more money. Speaker of the House gets $223,000. But it's safe to say that Duncan Hunter's family was probably doing just fine. Now, if you're a member of Congress, you have a certain amount of expenses that come along. You effectively have to maintain residences in 2 places. You need to live in your district. Most guys have to rent a place for them to live in when they're over in Washington. But this is a pretty good living. Most of these guys have some sort of investment income. Very few people go to Congress penniless. And that in addition to getting very generous pension and health benefits and all that, most members of Congress can retire when they're done when they lose office or choose to depart from Congress. You're going to make a good living. You're going to join a corporate board. You can go teach at a university somewhere. Most of these guys end up, if not doing lobbying, then joining a politically connected law firm and doing consulting, which is totally not lobbying, as folks like former Senator Tom Daschle keep assuring us. So I don't like hearing any member of Congress cry poverty. Trust me, you're in really good shape. David Brooks once wrote about a phenomenon he described as status income disequilibrium, where you have a job that is considered very prestigious, but you don't make nearly as much money as all of your peers. And you spend a lot of time around people who are rich. Let's say you're a member of Congress and you're making something in that, close to $200,000 a year, but you spend all of your time around millionaires. In fact, you probably spend a lot of time asking for money from millionaires and billionaires. And you say, I'm as smart as these people. I'm as bright and accomplished and hardworking as these people. I'm flying in economy plus, and they have their private jets and stuff like that. But in the end, you sign on for the job. Would you ask money for, to support your political campaign? They think they're supporting your political campaign to make sure that you get reelected to Congress and continue to fight for the causes you believe in. They're not paying to send you to SeaWorld. Let's also remember that the gift laws on Congress are, strict, but not unbelievably strict. most of this stuff you have to disclose. You're also not barred from investment income and things like that. We've seen members of Congress getting book deals and having, some unsavory movements in their investments and things like that. In other words, I don't quite understand how Duncan Hunter and his family thought they could do this for this long and not have it catch up with them. It speaks to a supreme sense of arrogance. They're clearly going to mount a legal defense, but it does not sound like there's much sympathy in Congress. There's obviously some reports that Speaker Ryan and other Republicans will seek to expel Duncan Hunter from the caucus over this, that they want to see him resign. They don't want to see him attempting to run for re-election and being an anchor on the rest of the Republican Party. They are not rushing to his aid in these allegations. It speaks to a certain level of arrogance, I think, Greg, that they could do this. And also, by the way, during the entire time, claiming to be fiscal conservatives while having no problem living high on the hog at someone else's expense.
Absolutely disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. And if this is true, which it seems like they have good evidence for with all the documentation, then absolutely he needs to face the music. And apparently his wife, too. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. I guess it's really our third bad. The horrible news came out yesterday morning, and just in the midst of an extremely busy news day, that authorities found the body of who they believe to be Mollie Tibbetts, the 20-year-old missing University of Iowa student who never came home after going jogging. There was a massive reward, huge social media campaign, very extensive effort to find her. And unfortunately, they found her. They found her dead, they believe, and they also have someone in custody who led them to the body, a man named Christian Rivera, 24 years old, who is in the country illegally. And so, of course, the media, given the fact that Mollie Tibbetts had been missing and been tracking this story quite extensively for weeks, but now that the suspect, now charged with first-degree murder, is in the country illegally, most of the mainstream media has very little interest in this story all of a sudden, except for two reasons. Number one, they say any time Trump brings it up, it's just to distract from the Manafort conviction and the plea bargain from Michael Cohen. Oh, and now it's also a Republican problem. The New York Post is this particular story, but others are running with it. The illegal immigrant who allegedly killed college student Mollie Tibbetts had worked for years at a farm owned by a prominent Iowa Republican family, a report said Tuesday night. Rivera, who is suspected of murdering Tibbetts while she was out jogging, was an employee in good standing at Geraghty Farms, which is owned by the family of former Iowa official Craig Lang, according to the Des Moines Register. It goes on to say that they actually ran this guy through E-Verify and apparently was cleared. Not quite sure how that happened. But, Jim, the sudden disinterest in the story and then the clambering to try to find any way that it reflects badly on the GOP is just disgusting.
I suppose it was just a matter of time, Greg, before we saw the headline, Republicans pounce on murder of young woman. She's still dead. It was still a murder, still a crime. The fact that someone's trying to get political benefit from a particular set of circumstances does not change what actually happened in that set of circumstances. And this really is kind of a level of debate that is so beneath us. It is infuriating, and you just kind of want to throw up your hands and walk away from public discourse. Because let's face it, lots of people come into our country illegally. Some of them are not bad people. Some of them end up becoming the dreamer kids who end up becoming the high school valedictorians. And we'd be fools to deny, some people who come over here through no fault of their own end up becoming good people, the kind of people we'd like to see becoming Americans. But on the other hand, the high school valedictorian is not necessarily representative of the 11 million illegal immigrants believed to be in this country. The same way, they're not all murderers, but we would be fools to deny the fact that there are some violent criminals within those ranks. It's not like there's no such thing as the drug trade involved. It's not as if there's no such thing as transnational gangs. It's not as if good people go into the people smuggling business, and we end up with these just absolutely asinine debates that basically turn into there are no bad illegal immigrants or there are no good illegal immigrants. And it's kind of maddening to think that you'd look at a group of 11 million people and not believe that there are some extraordinarily wonderful folks in there and not some extraordinarily horrible folks in there. And the degree to which, missing young woman in a small town, the sort of, true crime drama thing that grabs people's attention. And at the moment it turns into, it was an illegal immigrant. Shh, wait, make the story go away. Stop talking about it. It's not news. It's not news. The Indianapolis Colts, they had a player who was killed by a drunken driver that turned out to be an illegal immigrant. these are things we should be able to talk about. This does not mean that every illegal immigrant is a drunk driver. This does not mean that every illegal immigrant is a murderer. But we do have to acknowledge that some percentage of them are violent criminals. And this is one of the reasons people want to see border security. This is one of the reasons people want to figure out a way to get people to stop overstaying their visas when they enter legally on a temporary amount of time and decide to stay longer. We should be having a better debate about this. And when the media does these sorts of things, when they suddenly dramatically alter their level of coverage of a story because they discover a fact that doesn't fit their preferred narrative, I think it adds to the cynicism. I think it adds to the hostility. It adds to people's lack of wanting to learn more because they no longer trust the sources that are giving them the information. Absolutely
disgraceful on so many different levels. Condolences, of course, go out to Mollie Tibbetts' family and all those who knew her and loved her. And it's worth discussing on a number of different levels, policy and otherwise. But apparently we can't have a fair discussion anymore on virtually anything. Jim, on that bright note, we'll talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And be sure to visit our friends over at ExpressVPN to get your 3 months free with a 1-year package, expressvpn.com/martini. And tune in again Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.